In the last 200 years, the European obsession with the land of Palestine has developed into a cult of Orientalism. Writers, travelers, photographers and painters have constructed an image of the romantic, exotic land of the Orient, reflecting their own fantasies and desires, inhabited by a mysterious people who've almost stopped in time. Modern figures blend into biblical scenes. This perception of the Orient was a distortion of reality, but it helped to sustain and endorse Western colonial domination over the area. The Oriental cult justified the power of the West over the Orient.
For Christians and Jews, the land of Palestine is just drenched in almost every rock, every place has a biblical meaning, and people who have read the Bible, whether Jewish or Christian, go to Palestine in order to see there restored or in some way commemorated the events of the Bible. I remember my father telling me as a boy, when he was growing up in the early years of the 20th century in Jerusalem, one of the things he would do, and he found it perfectly natural to do that, was to sell crowns of thorns to visiting German and British tourists who came there looking on the Mount of Olives, looking for bits of Palestine to take home with them.
The tourists who flock to Israel today are the latest in the line of pilgrims and visitors who want to capture the spirit of the Holy Land.
Lean back, lean back, lean back.
Just a pound coin.
Unless the banks here can change.
Hidden behind these myths and expectations lies the history of the indigenous people of the area, the Palestinians. For generations, the Palestinians have been primarily a settled people, living in villages and farming the land. The main activity was the citrus industry, and the principal trade was the export of oranges through Palestine's major port, Jaffa. The majority of Palestinians were Muslims. There was an important Christian minority, and there had always been small communities of Orthodox Jews.
Well, I think Palestine is unique in the Arab world in the sense that the Muslims were very familiar with the Christians, and the Christians were familiar with the Muslims. The Muslims were familiar with the Jews, and the Jews were familiar with the Muslims and the Christians. As I grew up in the land, I knew something about Easter, I knew something about Christmas. It's not mine, but I used to see the festival in the Christian section of the city. On Saturday, I knew that the Jews must not do something about the light, and they used to hire us, in fact, to go and turn off the candle or turn off the light. They would pay us, 5 pennies or whatever it is. We knew something about kosher food. We knew all of that. There was a tremendous amount of interchange of not only information, but real knowledge and respect.
After the fast of Yom Kippur, the Arabs used to come to our home and bring us the pitas, the food. After their holidays, we used to go and visit them. Arabs and Jews lived in such a way that there were no differences. As a matter of fact, we didn't ask whether this one is an Arab or a Jew. We spoke Arabic at home. My mother language was Arabic. And the way we were dressed, the way we felt, our tradition was exactly the same.
There were important urban centers. Here, people were engaged in commerce and industry. The cities were proud and vibrant, and it was here that there was the greatest exchange of ideas with the West. Schools, colleges, religious societies helped encourage the development of a middle class with a conscious sense of a Palestinian identity. Political influence was still concentrated in the hands of a few traditional families. By the early 20th century, there were the first stirrings against Turkish rule amid a general awakening of Arab nationalism. At this time, there was no separate Ottoman province of Palestine. The area was subdivided into several districts, all administered from Beirut and Damascus. The total population of Palestine amounted to about 500,000 Palestinian Arabs living in some 800 villages and in a score of cities and towns. But in the 1880s, the first Zionist settlers began to arrive from Europe, inspired by an entirely new type of movement. As a political movement, Zionism was born at a time of intense European nationalist rivalry. Founded by a group of Jewish intellectuals, the Zionist movement looked to the acquisition of land in Palestine as the first stage in the creation of a Jewish state, as a refuge from centuries of persecution. Wealthy European Jews like the Rothschilds financed the building of early Zionist settlements in Palestine. Zionists began to settle on the land that was special to them. The seeds of the conflict over the land of Palestine in modern times were sown.
I think that the Zionist success in Palestine was premised on the notion that there was no one in Palestine, or if there was, they weren't worth bothering about. And certainly the case that the Zionists made to the West was essentially, as Israel Zangwill put it, that it was a people without land going to a land without people. And that slogan caught it very neatly. So that the Palestinians, who were obviously there and were in fact seen, I mean, they couldn't have not been seen, and they were even seen in some of the films and pictures of the time, and even descriptions of the time, were almost always treated not as a people, capital A, capital P, but as inconsequential nomads, as miscellaneous peasants, as people without any important identity or attachment to the land. They were, as one of the early Zionist settlers in the 20s put it, they were like the rocks of Judea that could be removed. They were an obstacle, but they could just be put aside, and they had pretty much the consciousness of rocks. In other words, not very much.
Clearly, the missionaries would have told the Zionists at the time that there are a people in Palestine. And therefore, the Zionists came up with the answer, yes, there are a people in Palestine, but they are backward, they are nomads, they are Bedouins, and therefore the act of Jewish settlement in Palestine would in fact be beneficial to these people. So they are not out to hurt the people, they are actually were out to benefit them. Much in the same way that European imperialist powers were selling their idea of civilizing the Afro-Asian, which justified the whole idea of colonial control of the Afro-Asian world. So in that sense, the Zionists shared with the Europeans an attitude of superiority based on a very deep sense of racism.